right, I'm getting ready to hit start webinar.
Okay.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ricardo Jefferson.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Ricardo Jefferson. I'm a student loan ombudsman. I work for the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking. And today we are here to welcome you to our program, to our webinar on public service loan forgiveness. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the public service loan forgiveness waiver program, which is a temporary program that will run only through October 31st of 2022. Before I get into that, though, I want to thank our partners at the Office of the Attorney General Carl Racine and his team. I'd like to thank my commissioner, Karima M. Woods, and my team at DISB. We are the District of Columbia's Insurance, Securities, and Banking regulator. We also regulate student loan servicers in the district. And I'd also like to thank our friends and contributing partner today, the Student Borrower Protection Center, that has agreed to join us today and to lead this presentation on the public service loan forgiveness waiver program. Next slide, please. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker, Mr. Winston Berkman-Green. He is the Deputy Director of Advocacy and Policy at the Student Borrower Protection Center. We will take questions, but we will not answer questions until the end of the presentation. So I really want to encourage you to listen to what Winston has to say. If you have questions about public service loan forgiveness, it is very likely that the webinar will address your questions. We will make a PDF available at the end. If you'd like that information, you can email us at dcloanhelp@dc.gov. We'll make sure we put the email address in the chat. You can also view this webinar online at the Student Loan Ombudsman website, which is also at disb.dc.gov. We'll put that information in the chat as well. I will now turn it over to Winston Berkman-Green. Thank you, Winston, and welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo, and to DISB and to the Office of Attorney General for having us. Really excited to be here and talk to you all about public service loan forgiveness. You know, this program that can offer people working in public service forgiveness on their federal student loans after 10 years. And as Ricardo said, to specifically drill down into this opportunity we have today running through October of this year for folks to get through the door and access that program who may previously have been ineligible or may not have understood how to qualify for it. So first, I'm just going to share my screen, and then I'm going to tell you a bit about what we're going to chat about tonight. All right, so you should be able to see my screen there. Ricardo, can I get a thumbs up to show that? Great, awesome, thank you. So before I dive into the slides, and I just want to give you a bit of a road mapping for what to expect. So first, I'm going to give a brief overview on the public service loan forgiveness program in general, and then I'm going to tell you about, including how to qualify for it, et cetera. And then I'm going to tell you a bit about this limited waiver that we've referenced now a few times, and I promise in a few minutes it'll make sense to you what that means. And then we're going to get very practical, right? I'm going to tell you sort of 3 steps that we think every borrower should take to make sure they benefit from this special waiver. And then we're going to walk you through how to take each step, right? So it's going to be a little bit repetitive, but that's on purpose because we want to make sure you understand, and especially in one sitting. You can certainly follow up and watch the video later, like Ricardo said, but in one sitting, we want to give you a couple opportunities to really have the information soak in, and then be prepared to sort of see the walkthrough steps that we're going to end with. And then after the presentation, as Ricardo said, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. The slide presentation I'm about to start runs somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes. So we'll really have the latter half of the hour plus to answer some of your questions. Finally, before I dive in, again, we are going to start big and then get very specific and narrow. So I do encourage you, as Ricardo already said, to sort of hold off on your questions until the end, because I suspect we're going to answer a lot of them. And then it makes it much easier for us when we go through the Q&A if we don't have to sift through questions that maybe were already answered during the presentation. So again, a little bit of repetition. I just sort of repeated half of what Ricardo said, but that's the name of the game tonight, to make sure that you all get the full benefit. All right. So as I said, there's going to be some repetition here, but that's not a bad thing. I'm going to start by just talking about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in general. Not everyone has heard of it, and if they've heard of it, they might not understand exactly what it is. And that's what we want to address tonight. Okay, so Congress created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in 2007 to help public service workers who were struggling with their student loan debt, and to make sure also that future students and graduates wouldn't be deterred from entering public service because of their debt and an impulse to enter maybe a higher paying field. So put very simply, PSLF, or Public Service Loan Forgiveness, is the promise that if a borrower works in public service and makes payments on their loans for 10 years, the remainder of their debt will be forgiven, of their federal student loan debt specifically. It ends up being a bit more complicated than that. So as I said, first, what we're going to do is just talk about the program requirements and eligibility requirements in general, and then we're going to move into the special eligibility window, this waiver period that we're in right now. Okay, so how does PSLF actually work? So more than simply working in public service for 10 years, there's actually 4 specific criteria. First, you need to have what's called a direct loan. That's one of several types of federal student loan. Other types are federal family education loan, or FFEL loan, or Perkins loan, but we're going to drill down on each of these more. So I'm just going to hit the high level on this slide. So first, you have to have a direct loan. Second, you need to be in the correct repayment plan, which for this program is mostly going to be an income-driven repayment plan for most borrowers. Third, you need to be working in a public service field and working full-time in that field. And finally, you need to make 120 qualifying payments. So that's 10 years worth of payments, right? 10 years, 12 months. So let's drill down into each of these. All right, so first, what type of loan? Only direct loans qualify. These have been the main federal student loan type since 2010. So if you've taken out a loan since then, it is likely already a direct loan. Now, there's different types of direct loans. You might see subsidized, unsubsidized, parent plus, graduate plus, but they're all part of this family of direct loans. But you might also have an older loan. So again, I mentioned one of them, those FFEL, Federal Family Education Loans, or Perkins loans, which were federal loans that still ran through your school. Those don't directly qualify. When I say directly, what I mean is that you can convert them into a direct loan. And again, that new direct loan will qualify for PSLF. The conversion process is something called consolidation. It's similar to what you think about maybe refinancing, but refinancing is specifically on the private market. Consolidation is when you go back to the government with your federal student loan and essentially trade it in. You take out a new federal loan to pay off your old federal loan. And that new federal loan will be a direct loan, and that will qualify you for public service loan forgiveness. Now, normally under this normal program rules we're talking about right now, when you do that consolidation process, you don't get credit for any pre-consolidation work in public service that you did. It's a new loan, and they treat that new loan as starting to counter to 120 as 0. But as we'll talk about this waiver in a couple of minutes, this waiver gets rid of that for a while. So this is a really special opportunity for people to get all the credit that they're due, regardless of what type of loan they have. But again, we're going to get into that. But the rules are going to go after October. The rules are going to go back to the standard PSLF rules, which is why I'm taking so much time to talk through it. Okay, so second, your direct loan needs to be in the right type of repayment plan. There are a bunch of repayment plans out there, right? But PSLF requires you to be in only a few of them, and the one that most people are going to be using is called an income-driven repayment plan, or IDR. These plans go by a couple of names. There's a couple IDR plans. It's an umbrella term. One is an income-based repayment plans, or IBR, income contingent repayment plan, ICR, pay as you earn, PAYE, repay as you earn, so REPAYE. These plans have a little bit of variation between them, but they all essentially do the same thing, which is they say, instead of setting your monthly payment to be a fixed number that will help you pay off your loan over a fixed number of years, 10 years, what these IDR plans do is they set your monthly payment to be a specific percentage, 10 or 15% of your income, right? And you recertify it every year so that as your income changes, your plan, your monthly payment changes. Very often that payment can result in a much lower payment than your standard would be. So 10%, 10 to 15% of your income, it's an adjusted calculation. So for some folks who have lower income or who are in between jobs, that actually might result in what's called like a $0 payment, right? It's still a payment even though you're not making an actual payment. So these IDR plans are really great for people who are lower income, who are struggling to pay their regular, just what what your loan says you have to pay. And so you can enroll in these IDR plans and get a more affordable plan for most people, but they also have the added effect of qualifying you for public service loan forgiveness. They have another perk too, which is that if you're in these plans for 20 or 25 years, your loan will be forgiven. But again, for PSLF purposes I'm talking about tonight, your loan is forgiven after 10 years. So that 20 or 25 is not so relevant. Okay. So again, it doesn't matter how much you're paying on these plans, it just matters that you are enrolled in them. All right, so we've talked about direct loan is the type of loan you have to have, and you have to be in the right plan, which for most people is going to be an income-driven plan. You can also be in the standard 10-year plan if that's what you're eligible for, but again, if it's a standard 10-year plan, you're going to pay it down over 10 years, and PSLF is you only get forgiveness after 10 years, so you're not getting much of a benefit there. Okay, so the third of the 4 requirements to get public service loan forgiveness is that you work in public service. So this is a focus on your employer, not on your role. So that's really important, right? It means that if you work for an eligible employer, it does not matter what you do. It just matters that they're eligible and that you work full time. So let's talk about those 2 components. So the eligible under the program the way it currently works is all government employers are eligible. So that's the District of DC, federal, state, local, tribal, right? County, any like a public school district, right? Any government employer is going to be eligible. So anyone who works for these employers can qualify under this one of the 4 requirements. Other eligible employers are 501c3 nonprofit employers. So most nonprofits we think of they're 501c3, but that's actually a very specific type of organization under the tax code. So 501c3 nonprofits are categorically eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And then there's a grab bag of certain other types of eligible nonprofits under the tax code, right? So not 501c3, but there's C1 through C10 or whatever it is, right? So certain other ones are eligible. Political organizations and unions are not eligible as examples of other types of nonprofits that might have employees seeking this program. The other half of this is that you have to work full-time. So full-time is defined currently in the program as the greater of either 30 hours a week or what your employer says is full-time. So if you work for someone who says full-time is 35 hours a week, 40 hours a week, you have to work 35 or 40 hours a week. Otherwise, you just have to work at least 30 hours a week. And this doesn't have to be with one employer. If you're someone who works with multiple employers, as long as each of them qualify, you can add them up together as long as you hit 30 hours, and then you'll get credit for that period of employment. So if you work 20 hours for one employer and 15 for another, that's 35. You have to pass 30. As long as both of those 2 employers are qualified government, 501c3 nonprofit, certain other nonprofits, you are good to go. Okay, that's the 3rd requirement. And then the 4th requirement is that you need to work, you need to make at least 120 of these qualifying payments. So payments on the right type of loan, on the right type of plan, while you have the right type of employment. It all has to happen together, right? They have to be made in full and on time, but they don't have to be made consecutively. So if you leave public service work, or if you take some time off for your family or your health, or if you switch into the private sector, as soon as you come back, or if you drop the wrong payment plan, whatever it is, as soon as you get back into each of those required elements, the right payment plan and the employment, you pick right back up where you left off. So it's 10 years worth of payments, but you can do it over longer than 10 years if you are not always compliant with each of these requirements. So they don't need to be consecutive. Okay, so there have been some impacts from COVID on the regular public service loan forgiveness program. The most important of which is that for those folks who haven't had to make payments over the last 2 years and the payment pause, right? I'm sure at this point we all know that applies to you. Each of those paused months will count as a qualifying payment. But what I mean by that is they count as that income-driven repayment plan payment, right? You still need to have the proper employment and you still need to have the proper loan type. So it's not that everyone gets a month towards PSLF, it's that public service workers with a direct loan under the payment pause get a credit for each of those months in the pause. That's an important thing to flag, and especially because people during COVID have experienced a lot of things like layoffs, reduced hours, retirement, et cetera, that might impact some of their eligibility under those specific requirements. Okay. So now that's the general program, right? Now we're going to focus on this waiver that we, Ricardo and I have referenced a couple times now. So last October, the federal government announced a special waiver that would address many of the issues people were having with PSLF. So maybe taking a step back, the program was created in 2007. In 2017, that's 10 years later, right? The first class of people were suddenly eligible to get their loans forgiven. And there was an abysmal rejection rate from people who applied. It was literally 99%. You can't make this stuff up. It was really frustrating. And what happened is it turns out that the program was really poorly communicated to borrowers, right? They didn't know they had to have a direct loan. They didn't know they had to be in the right payment plan. Servicers, the companies they interact with, were telling them the wrong thing. They were saying, oh, you're good to go. Oh, go in this forbearance, when really a forbearance is a non-payment and doesn't count as a payment plan, et cetera. It was, to use a technical term, sort of a mess, right? And in the years, since then, it's become clear what some of the issues were. So when they announced this waiver, what the federal government is trying to do is address a lot of those issues. So this is a response to the fact that the program wasn't working. And they had that really bad initial rejection rate. So for a limited period of time, what the Department of Education is doing is they will retroactively grant credit towards public service loan forgiveness for any months that a borrower has been in a qualifying public service job, regardless of the loan type, regardless of the payment plan, and even regardless of if they actually made a payment. The only reason, if you have the right job, the only reason that you might not get credit on a month that you had your loan is if the loan was not in a repayment status, which means if it was in deferment, forbearance, or default, those are all statuses where you're not considered in repayment. So again, just to repeat, the affirmative, through this program, and we're going to go through all the details, you can get credit since 2006, going back as far as 2007 when the program began, for any month when you had a public service qualifying job, so still that government employment, 501c3, other nonprofit, and your loan wasn't in deferment, forbearance, default, right? It's not quite as simple. You have to take some steps that we're going to talk about, but that's what this waiver does. So for a year, they're trying to get people who were previously ineligible because of bureaucratic rules the credit that they were due, and then going forward, get everyone on the right path. Okay. So again, regardless of the loan type, payment plan, you can get credit. So really what this is doing is it's addressing those first two requirements that we talked about previously. And again, this is retroactive. So it's for past payments that may be redeemed and eligible technically. You already got a determination. They're going to reverse that. Or you didn't even bother applying because you didn't think you were eligible. And another thing that this does is address that issue that I mentioned earlier, which we'll discuss, about when you convert your loan to the correct type, you lose the credit, right? So people who've been working in public service for like a decade, they were sort of demoralized or disincentivized to convert their loan to the right loan type because they're not going to get credit for that past work. So there's sort of this mentality like, all right, well, I guess I'll just keep paying and I'll pay it down and I won't get the benefit of this program that I have a statutory legal right to. This creates a loophole to let you convert that loan to the direct loan type, but then not lose that past credit. Another important thing that happens during this waiver is that normally you have to be in that eligible employment at the time that you apply for public service loan forgiveness and at the time that your loan is forgiven. It's a very rigid program in that sense. During this waiver period, though, they've waived that. It's special, I should have mentioned, it's special emergency COVID authority they're using to do this. That's why it's only temporary. But they've waived that requirement. So if you've left public service field, but you want to get credit for the work you previously did, or if you've retired from public service, but you have like 20 years of work under your belt, right? You can now apply during this special waiver and you can get that, that credit that you've earned and potentially get your loans forgiven. Also, other periods of time that previously didn't count, like deferment or forbearance, if you did that because you were in the armed forces or serving in the military, those periods of time will now count. Okay, so how does it actually work? It's not automatic, right? So to get the benefit of this waiver, this look back period, to give everyone all the credit they should have, you have to do some things. So again, normally you have to have the direct loan type. Although you're going to get credit if you don't have a direct loan type, you're only going to get that credit if you make that step to consolidate your loan. And if at the end of the day, you end up with a direct loan. So it's not that you can get PSLF with your FFEL loan, your older loan, or with your Perkins. It's that when you convert it, you'll keep your credit that you could have gotten in the past. And on your new direct loan, it'll have grandfathered in all that work that you did. So it's important that borrowers take that step to convert their loan. The other thing is that regardless of your loan type, you need to file the paperwork associated with PSLF, right? And you need to do that by the deadline. The government, quite simply can't give you credit for a job it doesn't know you have, right? And although we definitely tell our, IRS knows where we work, all that stuff, the government doesn't work that way, right? You need to tell the Department of Education who you work for and how long you worked there and that you were full-time and all those things so they can give credit to you for that. So to benefit from this waiver, right, in summary, you need to, if you have older loans, convert them into direct loans. And you need to, everyone should do this, file paperwork with the Department of Education. Even if you think you've already filed it, file it again, unless you can go back and confirm your record is accurate, and file it for as much time as you've worked since you took those loans out, right? You may have thought 10 years ago, oh, well, that time with that past employer I didn't have the right loan type, so I might as well not bother filing paperwork for it. File it now because you'll get credit for that loan, for that time you had the work with the older loan, even if it was 10 years ago. All right, so critically, you have to do this by October 31st, as Ricardo said. There's a deadline to this. It was October to October, 2021 to 2022. So everyone who wants to take advantage of this has to change and consolidate their loan type and certify their employment by filing the paperwork. You have to do it by October 31st. Now, this does not mean that you will have your loan consolidated by then, and it doesn't mean that you'll have your debt forgiven by then. It just means that to benefit from it, the borrower, you all have to take these two steps by then. The federal government is processing this on a rolling basis and issuing forgiveness in waves. Like this is not a fiction or a dream or a joke. Like we're seeing people getting literally hundreds of thousands of dollars forgiven and having a zero debt balance overnight, but it does take them time to do it. But to make sure you benefit from it, you need to hit this deadline for these two things. Consolidate if you have to, file your paperwork. And you might not get your forgiveness until like January of 2023. And waiting is not fun, I get that, but to benefit from the program, you have to take these steps by the deadline. Okay, so we've just talked about PSLF in general. Then we talked about the waiver and what this point in time, the modified eligibility requirements. So with that in mind, and I'm just going to repeat them again because it's super critical. So repetition is key here, right? During the special period of time, you can get credit towards the 10 years you need for total federal student loan forgiveness if you, for any time period since 2007, that you've had a loan that wasn't in deferment, forbearance, or default, and that you had a job that qualified for public service loan forgiveness, federal, state, local government, tribal, any kind of government, 501c3 nonprofit, certain other nonprofits. Now we're going to talk about the 3 steps everyone should take to make sure they benefit from this special opportunity. Okay, we're going to drill down into each of these, but the 3 things are confirm if your past or present employer are qualifying public service employers. If not, there's no point in proceeding, right? This is still the backbone of this is public service employer. Second, determine your loan types, whether or not you have to consolidate. And finally, certify your employment. Again, they can't give you credit for jobs they didn't know that you were doing and for full-time work, et cetera. So let's talk about each of these. And then again, repetition, after we tell you what to do, we're then going to walk through slides that show you screen grabs of the computer and literally how do you do each of these steps. And then again, we'll get to Q&A. So confirm your employer and that they're a qualifying employer. So nothing about this requirement has changed except for the fact that I mentioned that you don't need to still be employed if you already have a bunch of credit you want to get certified or get your loans forgiven. But in general, you still need to have had that employment to benefit from this. Now, if you aren't sure whether your employer qualifies, the Department of Education maintains a list that you can search called the PSLF help tool. You can access it on studentaid.gov. You're going to be hearing a lot about studentaid.gov in the next 10 or 15 minutes. It's also the first step, like checking your employer is the first step of that help tool. So it's very easy to quickly go on and check. You don't have to click through too much to get to it. That list is not exhaustive. It's just a list of people who have previously qualified, right? So if no one from your organization has applied before, it's not going to be on a list. And that doesn't mean that they're not eligible. It just means the department hasn't already confirmed that. So you check that list. Again, I'm going to show you in a bit how to do that. All right, second, what type of federal loans do you have? That's how you know whether you have to consolidate or not. So again, the 3 major types of federal student loans out there are direct loans. Those are the ones that are eligible. Federal Family Education Loans, or FFEL, FFEL loans, and Perkins loans. So for those who have the Fell and Perkins loans, they're the ones who have to consolidate under the waiver to make sure that they benefit. Again, consolidating is like refinancing with the federal government. You're handing them your old loans and they're giving you a new direct loan for the same amount because you're paying off your old loans with a loan you're taking out from them. But remember, what's special about the waiver is you don't have to start your PSLF counter from scratch, right? You're getting credit on your new loan in a way that you wouldn't normally do that, which is why it's important to consolidate now. And again, even if the consolidation isn't processed by October 31st, that's fine. You just have to have applied. You have to have done your part by October 31st to get in under the deadline. Okay. And the final step that all public service workers should do, regardless of what kind of loan you have, unless you are super sure you've already gotten all the credit you're owed, is certify your employment with the Department of Education. So you do this using a form called the PSLF form. It used to be called the Employment Certification Form, or ECF. If you've been around and been doing this, that might sound familiar. So borrowers should certify their employment using that same PSLF help tool on studentaid.gov, which you're going to see in a second. And that tool will generate the form for you and sort of populate the fields you need. And then you're going to have to sign it yourself, get your employer to sign it, and then submit it to your loan servicer. Again, we're going to go over all of that. Okay, so now we're going to walk through, those are the 3 steps: confirm your employer, confirm your loans, and consolidate if necessary, certify your employment. We're going to go through how to do each of those. These are the sort of final steps, and then we'll get to answering some of your questions. Okay. All right, so how to confirm your employer. Again, studentaid.gov, you're going to be going here a lot. This is the central portal for all your federal student loan needs. If you don't have a user ID and login, you should make one, because this is going to be, again, you can do basically everything you need to do here. So on the screen, you'll see some red box outlines. You're going to go to Manage Loans and hover over it, and then the drop down will come. And then you can click Public Service Loan Forgiveness. You'll see the PSLF help tool there. When you click it to launch it, this is what you'll see. So borrowers, in the very first step, right, is add employers. So you can click add employers, and then you put in the employer identification number. It's a tax number, an EIN number. If you don't know your employer's EIN number, you can ask your HR. You can look on your W-2 for larger employers. You can Google it usually, and then your periods of employment. This is how it helps populate the form for you. So I used to work for the state of New York. So that's the information you see in front of you, state of New York's EIN, the time I worked there. And then you can see on the right-hand side, it comes up as eligible, that little green box. Again, this is not exhaustive. So if it comes up as uncertain or no result, you should proceed anyway. If it comes up as ineligible, but you think that's wrong, you're like, I literally work for the government, like this cannot be right, or I know I work for 501c3 specifically, again, you should proceed. This is not a conclusive list. If the government's gotten it wrong, Department of Education's gotten it wrong, you should just proceed, and hopefully you can get that resolved. Okay, so that's how you confirm your employer, right? Studentaid.gov, manage your loans, PSLF, help tool. This is the first step. You just plug in that information, and if they're there, green, you're good to go. If not, just think about it based on what you learned tonight, figure out whether you think your employer is eligible, and then proceed. Again, there's no point in doing the rest of this if you don't have an eligible employer. Okay, step 2. Once you determined eligibility, then you want to go on and confirm your loan type. All right, so this can be confusing. A lot of folks don't necessarily know this. It's confusing because there's federal loans and private loans, and the same companies work on both of them. It totally makes sense that people don't know the specifics about their loan, quite frankly. But to see all of your federal loans, you're going to go back to studentaid.gov. Studentaid.gov is only federal loans, but it's all of your federal loans, which is really helpful. So if you're aware of a loan that you don't see on there, it's probably a private loan. All right. Make a login if you don't have one. If you don't know your information, you can reset it and gain access. When you're on the when you log in, it'll bring you to your dashboard, right? And on the dashboard, you'll see a list of all of your loans. If you drill down into each one of them, they will quite simply say the word direct, or they won't say direct, right? They'll say like a direct, a Graduate Plus loan or something, or they'll say an FFEL loan. It is as simple as looking and seeing, is it direct or does it not say direct, right? The ones that aren't already direct, you're going to want to consolidate. For a more granular list on that same dashboard, you can click download my aid data, and then it'll give you this kind of a printout, right? These are text files, TXT files. Once you download it, you can see the entire, your whole loan universe, basically, including loans that have been paid off. So you want to focus on the ones that don't have a $0 balance, right? You don't need those to be forgiven. You want to focus on the ones that do have a balance. So on each of these, you can see that they gave you the loan information. So where those blue arrows are, you see it says loan type. That's what we're focused on. Each of these say FFEL at the beginning. One says FFEL Stafford, one says FFEL Consolidated. So one on the left was previously consolidated, years ago, but it was consolidated into an FFEL loan, not into a direct loan. Now, these days, you're only consolidated into a direct loan. The FFEL consolidation no longer happens. But we can tell from looking at this that both of these are going to need to be consolidated if we want them to count for PSLF. Okay, and again, ignore the ones that have $0 balance because you don't need to worry about them. They've been consolidated already, or they've been paid off or paid down. Okay, so now if you have non-direct loans, what do you do about consolidating them? We're going back to studentaid.gov, back to manage loans, and then you see on the left-hand corner, bottom left, consolidate my loans. You can click that, and then you either log in or launch the application. It's all online. It takes you about 15 or 20 minutes to complete. And it guides you through the process, right? So it'll guide you through selecting which loans you'd like to include in the consolidation, confirming the amount and the interest rate of what your new loan will be. The interest rate will be a weighted blended average. So you can't use consolidation to sort of game the system and get a worse or a better rate. It's about a reflection of the rates you had before. But if you had a high value, a high dollar, high balance loan with a low rate and a low balance, high rate loan, the new loan will be weighted so it reflects more the lower interest rate. It'll blend them, but in a weighted fashion. It'll also confirm how you select if you want to enter a payment plan immediately. And again, you're going to want income-driven repayment plans, most likely. And then how do you select a servicer? And then you sign at the very end. Now, a tip that's specific to the waiver and a little bit confusing, and we can get into it more in the Q&A if folks have more questions, is there might actually be a benefit to borrowers consolidating non-direct loans with a direct loan or consolidating two direct loans together. Now, you might ask, Winston, why is that? You've said direct loans are already eligible. The reason is during this waiver, the government has said the way they're going to handle a consolidated loan, which is, usually has one or more, two or more loans underneath it that were bundled and consolidated together. You take your 2 or 3 FFEL loans and turn them into one direct consolidated loan. They can't disentangle those loans when they're trying to figure out how to forgive it under PSLF. So what they've said they're going to do is they're going to say, all right, it's one direct consolidated loan. We know that there's multiple loans under it. We're going to look at the oldest, the most eligible, the one that has the most public service associated with it under the direct loan. And we're going to give the whole direct loan that much credit. So basically, the younger, newer loans with less public service credit towards them are benefiting from having been associated and consolidated in with these older loans. Now, because FFEL loans are almost by definition older than direct loans, they were an older program that's now done. Through this waiver, that FFEL loan might have more time that you've worked in public service associated with it. It might get forgiven sort of overnight. Whereas a direct loan might be newer and you might be still working towards 10 years on that direct loan. An example when this might happen is undergraduate debt versus graduate school debt, right? If you took out an FFEL loan for undergrad and then you worked in public service for a few years, then you went to graduate school and took out a direct loan, and now you're back in public service, that FFEL loan will have that interim work associated with it that the direct loan won't have. So it's going to get for closer to 10 years faster. But if you combine them, the whole thing will be forgiven faster, right? So there is, and this isn't gaming the system. The government has just been very clear this is how they're handling it. So if a borrower has older loans, they might want to consolidate them with their newer loans, even if the newer loans were already eligible. Again, we can try to explain that a different way during the Q&A if that's confusing. It is confusing. Okay. Remember, during the regular PSLF program, you need to be in an income-driven repayment plan to qualify for most people. So if you're going to be consolidating your loans and you're not getting the full 120 that you need credits for PSLF through the waiver, that's fine. You keep all those credits, but when the waiver is done, you have to add to them under the regular program rules. So under the regular program rules, most people are going to have to be an IDR. So when you're consolidating your loan, it benefits the people mostly to start their consolidation loan under an income-driven repayment plan. Okay, final of the 3 steps, and then we're wrapping up. How do you certify your employment, right? Again, they can't give you credit for work that they didn't know that you've done. Just like confirming your employers, you're going to start at studentaid.gov. You're going to go back through the same steps. So manage my loans, public service loan forgiveness, drop-down menu, PSLF help tool. This is the same slide from before. You're going to get through the first steps of the help tool, put in your prior employers. Same slide as before. You're going to confirm who's eligible, put them on there. And then the help tool will guide through the remaining steps, including tagging which loans you want to include for forgiveness. And once you've gone through all the steps, it'll generate a PDF form that you can print out. Again, you're going to have your, this is the PSLF form, formerly the ECF, and you're going to have your employer sign it to say that, yes, this person worked here full time during this period of time, and yes, I'm a government employer. Just it's basically that simple. And then you're going to sign it, and then you're going to submit it to the dedicated federal student loan PSLF servicer that is indicated on the form. Currently, that's Fed Loan Servicing. On these forms, you're going to want to, especially during the waiver, make sure that you're covering all periods of employment that might be eligible, right? That's the whole point. Get as much credit as you're entitled to. So make sure that you're going back to as far back as 2007 for any employer that was qualifying during which you had a loan, right? That's the sort of Venn diagram we're going for. So make sure you do that also by October 31st to benefit from the waiver. They might not get back to you and give you the credit by October 31st. That's fine, but you need to have filed this by that deadline to benefit from the waiver. Okay, so what's the process look like when you do this, right? So the general process is that, apologies if you can hear the sirens in the background, but the general process is that when you submit it, Fed Loan Servicing, the company that currently is the dedicated servicer, will do a preliminary review and they'll make sure that you have the right loans, and then they'll assign the loan over to them. They will become your dedicated servicer, at which point they will review the rest of the eligibility and get back to you and tell you how many credits towards PSLF you have. Right now, the government itself, not just the servicer, is doing some of the review because there's such a high volume and because this is a special program. Now, you technically don't have to do, except for the waiver, which everyone should do immediately, but technically you don't have to submit the PSLF form until you are ready for forgiveness, right? That 10 years. We recommend everyone do it on a more regular basis, on an annual basis, because then if you get the form rejected, you know there's an issue, you can identify it immediately and not accidentally waste several years in the wrong repayment plan or with an employer that you thought was a public service employer and it wasn't. Or if the government has an issue, you can get it corrected. If you do qualify, you get it corrected early on, and then in subsequent years, they just process the form without any issues. So again, we recommend folks do it annually, do it regularly, but for the waiver purposes, you should all do it before October 31st, before Halloween, to make sure that you get credit. Okay. So now we are going to talk about, so we're sort of done with the waiver part and the steps you should take. I'm just going to quickly talk about common issues that people are seeing when applying for the waiver specifically, right? And then this is just 3 or 4 slides, and then we're going to wrap it up and do Q&A. So one is that we see people whose forms get rejected because they're illegible or they're sloppy or they're not that bad, but like whoever was processing the form said they were legible or sloppy, right? So this is an example of, you don't want this. If you hand it to your employer and they send it back to you with all these edits on it, just create a fresh form and send it to the person who just returned the form to you and say, I just made a fresh form based on your edits, please sign this, right? You don't want to get automatically rejected because someone decided they couldn't literally process the form and has nothing to do with the merits of it itself. That's one thing. All right, another thing is that using the PSLF help tool, unfortunately, there's been a bit of a lag between the waiver policy being announced and the technology that is supposed to be used to implement the waiver. One example of this is normally, right, to get PSLF credit, you can't be in deferment or forbearance. You have to be in repayment. But as I said, during the payment pause that we're currently living in, each of those months will count. The payment pause is a special type of forbearance. It's an administrative forbearance that you didn't choose to be in that gives you credit for this, right? So it's an outlier and a unique circumstance. Unfortunately, the PSLF help tool still says your loans are in forbearance. You have to come out of forbearance to benefit from this program. That is confusing and it's inaccurate. It is not an impediment. You can continue, but you might get stopped, right? You might sort of read it like, oh no, what do I do? This is so confusing. I'm just saying, go ahead and ignore it. This is not an administrative forbearance you chose. You don't want to exit it. You all want to get the maximum value out of that payment pause that you can in general and towards PSLF. So if you see that, just know that it's wrong and that they're being slow in updating it, and there's some inconsistencies. We've been asking with some partners for them to update this, but it's taken longer than it should. Okay. Similarly, the PSLF help tool, this is another sort of potential roadblock that you just need to get through. There's a lot of different options on it. The goal is just to get your form in, right? So if you come across something like this, where it says, do you think you've already made over 120 payments? But it's not letting you choose the option for whatever reason. You can see here, there's that red alert thing on it. Just pick whatever lets you proceed, right? The goal is just get your paperwork that documents what you've done, get it in by the deadline. Don't let some confusing or potentially misleading disclosure or tech option get in the way. And then finally, unfortunately, we've been seeing folks getting inaccurate payment count responses when they file their papers, right? Or in this instance, when you consolidate your loan, a lot of people are automatically getting a letter from their new servicer saying, here's your loan. You can see on the screen on that third from the right, PSLF qualifying payments total, it just says 1, right? That's because this is a brand new loan. And under the regular program rules, new loans don't get grandfathered in the old time. This is an example of an auto-generated letter not reflecting the waiver policy, right? So you get this, you're suddenly like, oh, I thought the whole point was that, you know, I'm going to be getting all this grandfathered time. If you get this, know that it's possible that you'll get it and just ignore it, right? There will be a follow-up at some point. You still need to make sure you submit your PSLF form, make sure you do all your things. There will be a follow-up paper that actually reflects the work you've done, probably from the government itself, not from the servicer. But we're seeing people get this, and it's very confusing, and it's literally counter to the purpose of the waiver when people get this inaccurate information. But most importantly, there's just this idea that you need to get your paperwork in, you need to document your time by Halloween, and then if there's an issue, it can get resolved later. That's not fun. I don't want to trivialize that. But in terms of benefiting at the end of the day, and they're going to announce an appeals process soon, as long as you've done those 2 steps, if something is inaccurate, it'll get resolved. You just want to have like anchored your right to it by getting the paperwork in on time. Okay, so the final thing is this return to repayment. I've talked about the payment pause. Lots of rumors flying. Just today, there was a breaking sort of news story about this being extended, but currently payments are set to resume on May 1st. We already know the government is thinking of extending this. They instructed servicers not to send statements. If you're getting statements saying payments are due, that is inaccurate. You should ignore it for the time being. As of today, that could change tomorrow, but if you received it, you know, today or before today, ignore it. The leaked potential announcement was that it would be extended again until the end of August. That hasn't been verified or confirmed. It could be later, it could not happen. But so let's pretend for this moment in time that everyone has to prepare for payments in May or June, right? So make sure your payments are affordable. Your payments will return to whatever you were paying in February of 2020 or go back in time to whatever that was. Keep in mind PSLF eligibility. So make sure you're in an income-driven repayment plan. You can use, the federal government has a loan simulator to tell you what the different payments would be under different plans. If you Google FSA loan simulator, you'll find it. It's on studentaid.gov. Enroll in a new plan if you need to and do it early. You know, there's no point in waiting. It's not going to kick you off the payment pause or anything. If you want to do auto debit, that has been disabled. So you should go ahead and redo that. But for a lot of people, their income might have changed, and that's not always a good option. Update your contact information on studentaid.gov specifically. There's tons of stuff happening right now. So you might want to make sure you get all the notices that they're sending out. And then finally, this is a ripe time for scammers because there's a lot of confusion. There's the waiver, there's servicers transferring, there's payment pause, et cetera. So make sure you update your information and then avoid any scams and report them, you know, as soon as possible. Okay, so here's the major takeaways, right? The waiver is exciting because it'll give you credit for past time that's previously ineligible. You have to act by Halloween. You need to confirm your employer. You need to check what type of loan you have and consolidate if necessary. You need to submit your paperwork all by Halloween. You need to make sure you're in an affordable plan for when payments resume. Could be in May, could be in August. Wait for an official government announcement about it. Update your contact information. And if you see something, say something. There's a lot of scammers out there and misinformation. Okay, so I'm going to rest on this slide for a second, and people can start going into the chat if you haven't already, if you have remaining questions. On this slide, what you'll see is Ricardo's information at DISB, at DISB, including the email address, dcloanhelp@dc.gov, that you can use if you need assistance. The Office of the Attorney General, which also co-sponsored tonight. You should reach out to them if you're having like more fraud issues, right? If you think your servicer has lied to you, or if something's really wrong, that they're going to like sort of enforce the law in a different way. And then finally, my organization, the Student Bar Protection Center, we partnered with a bunch of teachers unions and put out a website called forgivemystudentdebt.org. And basically all the information you saw here tonight is on that website, and we're regularly updating it to reflect changes. Okay, so I'm going to take my slides down, and then Ricardo and I think, are going to get into a bit of a dialogue to do the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Winston. It's so much information. And I could just, you know, I can feel the energy in the room from the participants with all their questions. And I know that a lot of the information that people are asking about, you've gotten into. I know that it's a lot. It's a lot for ears that are not accustomed to hearing this type of language and dialogue. And so we thank you for what you're doing by being here today. And we're going to ask you a few questions that kind of go back and punctuate some things that people raise as concerns. Major concern in our area is the treatment of contractors. So can you talk a little bit about, what people who have worked under contracts may be able to do to obtain public service loan forgiveness? Because we have even people in district government may be contractors, or people may work on a defense contract or something. So talk a little bit about contractors.
Yeah, it's a great question. And unfortunately, the outcome isn't great for some people, right? So the bottom line is PSLF requires that your employer be a qualified employer, government, 501c3 nonprofit, certain other nonprofits. Your employer for this context is going to be defined as who pays you, right? Who is sending you your paycheck? Who's on your W-2? So for a lot of contractors, that's actually a private contracting firm, right? Whether it's ranging from a specialty expertise firm like a defense contractor or something that is, functionally being detailed to the government, you're sitting next to a government employee, or whether it's a temp agency, right? And you're going and providing staff support, again, next to a government employee. If your employer is not literally the government, you need to look at their status and figure out, are they going to be eligible? For a lot of people, that's going to be a private for-profit company that is not an eligible. They are not a 501c3 nonprofit, other nonprofit, or government. For some people, it will be a 501c3. But the short answer, that's the long answer. The short answer is, unfortunately, most contractors are going to find themselves actually working for a for-profit and therefore will not be eligible. There's a lot of advocacy to change that, but that's not changing today, and it's not changing as part of this waiver.
Right. There's also a popular misconception that if you work in a school, but you're not a teacher, you may not be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Can you clarify once again that all people who work in schools?
Every single person, again, it's about who you work for, not what you do, right? So as long as you work for a public school and you do it at least 30 hours a week or more if they require more, right? There's that definition. You qualify. Now, there are other programs that are very specific to teachers. That's not this program. This program says, I don't care what you do. You can be a coach, you can be security, you can be a counselor, you can be custodial staff. It does not matter as long as you work for the right employer. What you do during the day does not affect your eligibility.
Very good. Yeah, I always like to tell folks, it doesn't matter if you're sweeping the floors or writing on a chalkboard. If you work for the school district or a nonprofit
bus driver,
school, bus driver, it really doesn't matter. What's important is, are you full-time? At a high level, Winston, can you go through those basic buckets, starting with loan type, meaning direct, repayment plan, income driven? Just tick through the buckets one more time for us.
4 things under the traditional program, and it's important to know this because it's clicking back on in November of this year. You need to have a direct loan. You need to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan. There are certain circumstances other than income-driven that can count, but in a broad audience, I'm just going to say income-driven repayment plan. You need to have, we just sort of talked about this, qualifying employment in full-time, so government, nonprofit, 501c3, certain other nonprofits, at least 30 hours a week or greater if they require greater. And finally, 120, doesn't have to be consecutive, but 120 months full on-time payments for that. During the waiver, the difference is you're going to get credit for any time that you were in qualifying employment and your loan was not in deferment, forbearance, or default. So it doesn't matter if you actually made a payment. It doesn't matter if you made the payment spread out over a while. As long as your loan status wasn't in deferment, forbearance, or default, you'll get credit for that, regardless of the loan type, as long as you take the steps to convert your loan into a direct loan by Halloween.
Can you talk a little bit about Parent Plus loans and how they can be treated? There's a lot of concern about Parent Plus loans, and we know that generally Parent Plus loans are eligible for public service loan forgiveness, but talk to us about what parents need to know.
Yeah, definitely. So Parent Plus loans, which can be a direct loan type, right? In general, they can qualify for public service loan forgiveness. They generally have to consolidate anyway to access one of those income-driven plans, but they don't have to jump through too many hoops, and that's something that we can follow up with later. But under the waiver, for no reason, this was just a policy choice. Someone drew the line in the wrong place, basically. Parent Plus loans do not qualify for the waiver themselves, by which I mean you will not get credit on a Parent Plus loan for periods of time that were previously ineligible. What you can do, however, is that sort of trick I mentioned about consolidating loans with other loans. The government has said specifically about Parent Plus loans that if you have debt you took out for yourself, that will qualify. If you have debt you took out for someone else, a Parent Plus loan, that won't qualify. But if you consolidate them together, the debt for yourself will basically carry the Parent Plus loan into eligibility, right? They're going to ignore the fact that a Parent Plus loan is part of that consolidation, and they'll just give credit and ultimately forgiveness for the whole loan. So that if you're a borrower with a Parent Plus loan who also has a non-Parent Plus loan for yourself, that's a way you can access the waiver. And that's an instance where if your existing debt for yourself was already a direct loan and you're like, well, they're great, I'm not going to have to consolidate. You actually might want to consolidate and consolidate it with your Parent Plus loan so that all of your debt gets the benefit of it. If you have any loan that is a federal loan that you think isn't going to qualify, consolidate it with one loan that will qualify, and the whole thing will suddenly qualify.
So where should the borrowers who are listening go to find out whether they have direct loans or not? There's so much language on these pages.
Yeah.
They see subsidized, they see Stafford, they see this school, they see that school. Some of them go to their servicer website. Just if you could just highlight one more time, there is really only one place where you should go to look at your federal student loan portfolio. Where is that one?
It's studentaid.gov. And not only should you go there to look at it, that's where you should go to basically do whatever you got to do. You can apply for IDR, you can apply for your consolidation, you can apply for PSLF there. So studentaid.gov, make your log in, and as soon as you hit your dashboard, boom, it'll have a list of your loans. And as you click into each of them, if it says direct, they're going to be direct. This is a shorthand way of doing it, right? But if it doesn't say direct, you can ignore all the other words at the end of the sentence. But if it says direct, it's going to be direct. If it doesn't say direct, assume you're going to have to consolidate.
Right. Very good. You mentioned earlier that there are circumstances where you might want to consolidate your direct loans, meaning you're not the person who has an old FFEL loan or Perkins loans, but all your loans are already direct.
Yeah.
Can you just explain one more time why a person who already has only direct loans and doesn't theoretically need to consolidate, why might he or she want to consolidate?
Definitely. So remember, direct loans is one of the 4 requirements. The other 4 is that you have them and make 120 payments, right? Or 120 credits earn the waiver. So for some people, and it usually takes the form of loans you took out for undergrad versus graduate, right? Because that's usually when you have space in between your borrowing history. Your older loans are just closer to 120. It's sort of that simple, right? The longer they've been in existence, if you've had qualifying jobs the whole time, the closer they're going to be to 120. And the less time they've been in existence, the less close they're going to be. So if you have 2 different but already eligible loans that have different tallies towards them, if you consolidate them, the greater tally will get grandfathered in. They're not going to average them. They're not going to do anything crazy like that. They're just going to say, which of these has the most credit? Boom, that's what we're going to give to your new loan. And then the whole thing will get forgiven on the timeline set by that older loan. So that's an instance where even if they're already satisfying that first requirement, direct loan, you can satisfy the 4th requirement, 120, faster by taking younger loans and consolidating them with older loans.
Winston, have you heard anything about the Department of Education possibly returning money to people who have paid during the pause? Can you speak to that? And I don't want to catch you off guard because this is something that is actually new to me.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's come up.
So there's 2 things going on here, right? One is that during the pause, and the first thing is not to do with PSLF at all, but it's all relevant because we're all people and our money is fungible, right? We want our money back. But the first thing is the pause. You're not required to, if you're eligible for the pause, if you're getting it, again, 2 years in, we sort of know who we are at this point. It was very confusing 2 years ago, but now we know. If you're getting the pause, you're not required to make payments. Some people chose to make payments because either they didn't turn off auto pay or they didn't know what was going on, or they were like, you know what? There's no interest right now. I can just make payments and eat down my principal. And that sounds good to me. If for whatever reason you're like, that actually doesn't sound good to me, either I'm going to get my loan forgiven, so why would I pay it down, or I need that money back. You can ask your servicer, and during the pause, any payments you voluntarily made can be returned to you. So that's the first part of it. And that's still true today. You should ask the servicer you're working with. The PSLF part of it is a lot of people are suddenly going from ineligible for PSLF or not, or they had a history of ineligibility and now they're working towards it, to getting all that back retro credit and suddenly having over 120 credits overnight, right? So there's two camps of people here. If you are someone who is only getting your loan forgiven because you're consolidating it, you have like 12 years of work, but you have the wrong loan type. So you're going to convert it, you're going to get your loan forgiven, but you're never going to actually be like paying on your direct loan because it's basically getting forgiven. There'll be a little lag. I just want to clarify that when you consolidate, you're going to consolidate and have a new loan, and it might take a few months to then process the PSLF. But generally speaking, you're consolidating specifically to get forgiven, not to continue building towards forgiveness. That person, unfortunately, they're not going to get any money back, even though they made more than 10 years worth of payment. For someone who already converted their loan a couple of years ago, and so for the life of their loan, for the life of all their loans, they have 13 years worth of payments, but only 7 of them are on direct loans, right? And then what's the remainder there? 5 or 6, I guess, are from their FFEL loan. Under this program, they suddenly go from having 7 to having 13 years. And so basically, you made 3 unnecessary years of direct loan payments. They're going to go to your most recent payments and say, we're going to reimburse you for this. Similarly, for someone who's had a direct loan the whole time, but they messed up the payment plan thing, and because of the waiver, they're suddenly getting extra time. So those borrowers, someone who made unnecessary overpayments on a direct loan specifically, they will get repaid for those payments, but only if the extra payments were made on a direct loan.
Right. And they're also getting a check for each overpayment.
Yeah.
Okay, great. If this keeps coming up, just if you could, and hopefully people have been able to pick this up. The pause period, in other words, counts for public service loan forgiveness, as long as you have the qualifying employer during this entire CARES Act pause. I just want to make sure that people understand that, and that the public service loan forgiveness includes the interest and principal on the debt. So if you're eligible for public service loan forgiveness, the entire loan is forgiven, including interest and principal. The question about annual certification continues to come up. Again, it's not required, but it's helpful because it helps you keep on top of what's going on with your account. I like to explain to people like this. You want to know when you're going to hit 120. You don't want someone else to tell you and just kind of hope that you're there. You want to know how close you are to crossing that line. And so that when it comes through, it's just confirming what you already know. So by certifying your employment every year, you are reinforcing for yourself, what that count is. Winston, can you explain to the group why it is better to use the PSLF help tool online than it is to simply download the PDF, fill it out, get all the signatures, and send it in? Can you explain how that operates with the back end going to the Department of Education?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can use both, right? Like the paper one, I mean, ultimately it's going to be paper too, because when you do the help tool online, it then generates the form that you got to print and get the signatures on, the sort of organic signatures. But as Ricardo said, there's a back end advantage. Like you're basically auto-populating a lot of information and keeping that record in your studentaid.gov account when you use the help tool. So it's pulling directly from the source information about your loans, and you're not going to have to figure out like, which loans am I trying to do here? It is just going directly to the source. And again, once you put in that information, it's there and part of your account. So that's you might have additional sort of tips or recommendations on that, Ricardo, but that's my take on it.
Right, absolutely. And just to be clear, there has been a question about what else is eligible for public service loan forgiveness besides direct loans. There isn't anything. You must get into a direct loan. Now, under the waiver program, all of your payments made under other loan types, they can be Perkins, they can be FFEL, they will be countable during this special period, but you have to consolidate into a direct loan. And ultimately, you have to get into an income-driven repayment plan. That's it. There are no other income plans besides income-driven repayment plans, and only direct loans are ultimately eligible. So those are two pieces of the puzzle that are not fungible. They cannot be changed. They are by rule, okay? And it also doesn't matter who your servicer is. So don't worry about whether you have this name company or that name company, because the loans are really from the Department of Education, right? The servicers are simply providing a service under contract. And so that is why the best source of information about your federal loans is available at studentaid.gov, where you can have access to your data at the National Student Loan Data System, where you can see your entire portfolio, your entire loan history, just like the sheet that, that Winston shared with us. When you go to websites like Navient, you're only seeing the customer service portal, and that's the information that they deem to be appropriate or necessary. But if you want the full history, you really need to go to studentaid.gov.
Yeah. And I see, and just to add to that a little bit, like, unfortunately, private student loans are not eligible, and there's no way to consolidate private student loans into a federal loan. So if you're someone who refinanced your federal student loans years ago to get a better interest rate in the private market, like, totally understandable why you would do that. Unfortunately, there's no way to undo that, and those loans are no longer eligible. And I see sort of in the chat, I just want to reiterate, the entire payment pause period, the last 2 years, those count towards PSLF. And another thing, but again, you have to have the right employment, but they count as a payment towards the 120. Another thing I'm seeing in the chat, just to clarify, is you never really have to like enroll for PSLF. It's basically always about like checking your status. So if you're like, oh, I didn't know about this, I'm just enrolling now, how I missed time. That's not how it works. All of your time in the past, that as long as it was eligible or is eligible during the waiver, you can certify it like later in time, right? So, you know, as Ricardo said, it doesn't matter what kind of servicer you have. Ultimately, you'll end up with a PSLF servicer, but if you haven't gotten there yet, it's not like you've wasted time, right? So you can just apply now, definitely apply during the waiver because you've got that extra benefit, but it's not something where you've like missed your opportunity. Except for that, you have to do this by October 31st, right? That is like the one instance of PSLF, you know, landscape where there actually is a time sensitivity to applying.
All right, very good. So I would like to leave everyone, because we are at the end of our time and it's been placed in the chat, the slide, the recording. This isn't our first time giving this particular presentation. So there's a January recording that is available right now at disb.dc.gov /page Student Loan Ombudsman webinars. There's also a PDF link of the presentation available there as well. So you are welcome to go and listen again and again. You are welcome to download the slides. If you are a district resident, you are also eligible to reach out at dcloanhelp@dc.gov to schedule an appointment to address your individual needs or concerns. I am a student loan ombudsman. I'm here to service the needs of district residents who are struggling with their student loan debt. But again, you have to reach out, send the email, schedule an appointment, and I do encourage you to try to take advantage of the information made available through the webinar, and also to take a look at the slides. Winston, I want to thank you for joining us again. I want to thank the Office of the Attorney General for their support in bringing this webinar this evening. I also want to thank my agency, Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking, for creating this space, as well as the mayor and council again. So thank you guys so much.
And spread the word, right? Spread the word. We have 6 months to get as many people as we know through this.
Yes. Process. Yes. Thank you, Winston. 6 months. You know, we're doing this after hours because we know that people work all day. So, you know, we want you to take advantage of this opportunity. Now, I see people in here saying, well, what about New York or Maryland? You can go to your state's local ombudsman. Winston actually used to work for the state of New York. So there are resources available in New York. Maryland and Virginia also have a person like me. So please reach out to your local jurisdictions for assistance. But I'm absolutely available to help our district residents. But all are welcome to listen. And again, sign in go online, listen to the webinar again, and download the PDFs and take advantage of them. So I want to shut everything down now and wish everyone a wonderful evening. Take care.